Have you ever found yourself standing at the edge of a memory, gazing back at a younger version of yourself? Someone who thrived on the hum of social circles, darting from one friend's doorstep to the next, a calendar brimming with gatherings and casual drop-ins. Maybe you were that person once, the one who made the rounds, who couldn't imagine a weekend without laughter spilling over a friend's kitchen table or the buzz of a crowded party. But then, as the years stacked up like chapters in a well-worn book, something shifted. The urge to venture out dulled, and those once essential visits started to feel less like a lifeline and more like a choice you could quietly set aside. And here's the beautiful, liberating truth. That's perfectly okay. In this journey we're about to take together, I'm going to unravel 6 deeply human reasons why I, and maybe you, don't go visiting around as much anymore. This isn't about turning your back on the world or locking the door on connection. No. It's about peeling back the layers of life to see how priorities transform, how relationships evolve, and why the way we spend our time begins to matter more than ever. If you've ever felt that subtle pull away from the social whirlwind but couldn't quite name why, stay with me. These words might just hand you the clarity you've been searching for, maybe even a quiet confidence in the path you're carving out. By the end, you might see yourself and the ties that bind you in a whole new light. So, let's step into this together. Here's where we begin. Reason 1. Prioritizing energy for meaningful interactions. Picture this. It's a crisp Saturday morning, the kind where the air smells faintly of possibility. Years ago, you'd already be lacing up your shoes, keys jangling in hand, ready to crisscross town to see a friend or crash a family brunch. Back then, it felt effortless, like your energy was a well that never ran dry. But now, as the seasons of life have turned, you've started to notice something. That well has a bottom. Driving through traffic, lingering in conversations that stretch past their welcome, showing up for every gathering. It all takes a toll it never used to. And so, you pause. You weigh your options. You ask yourself, who truly matters? Where does my energy belong? As we age, we come face to face with a quiet truth. Our energy isn't infinite. What once felt like a boundless resource now feels precious, something to guard and spend with intention. When you were younger, socializing was a whirlwind of keeping up. Acquaintances, colleagues, that friend of a friend you met at a party once. It was about casting a wide net, staying visible, feeling connected. But over time, that net starts to feel heavy. You realize you don't need to catch everyone. Instead, you begin to crave quality over quantity. Those rare, soul-nourishing moments with people who light you up, who make you feel seen, who leave you better than they found you. Think back to a time you dragged yourself out the door, not because you wanted to, but because you felt you should. Maybe it was a co-worker's get-together, voices clashing over lukewarm appetizers, or a distant relative's house where the small talk circled endlessly around the weather. You sat there, smiling through it, but inside, you were counting the minutes until you could slip away. When you finally got home, shoes kicked off, silence settling like a soft blanket. You felt it. Exhaustion, yes, but also a pang of regret. Why had you given your time to something that left you so empty? Take Frank, for instance. Frank was a man who wore guilt like a second skin. In his younger years, he'd been the life of every room, always the first to arrive, the last to leave. But as grey crept into his hair and the days grew more finite, he started to feel the weight of those obligations. Turning down an invitation gnawed at him. He worried people would think he'd stopped caring. Then, one day, he noticed something remarkable. The friends who truly knew him didn't flinch when he said no. They didn't need him to prove his loyalty with a knock on their door. So, Frank made a choice. He stopped scattering his energy across fleeting visits and poured it into the relationships that ran deep. His daughter's late-night calls, his old college buddies' rare but heartfelt lunches. And suddenly, socializing wasn't a chore, it was a joy again. This isn't about shutting the world out. It's about choosing wisely. Your time is a currency, and not everyone deserves a withdrawal. The connections that endure don't demand you show up at every turn. They thrive on mutual understanding, a quiet trust that says, "I'm here, even when I'm not." So when you catch yourself hesitating before heading out, don't feel guilty. You're not losing your spark. You're learning to spend it where it shines brightest. Reason 2, avoiding unnecessary stress and drama. Now imagine this. You're pulling into a driveway, the engine still humming as you steel yourself for what's ahead. You used to walk into these visits with a lightness, unbothered by the quirks of others, the gossip that swirled like smoke, the petty jabs disguised as jokes. Back then, you could shrug it off, let it roll past you. But as the years have carved their lines into your life, you've grown a little less patient, a little more protective of your peace. You've learned a hard-earned lesson. Not every social call is worth the storm it stirs inside you. There's a moment that comes with age, a reckoning of sorts, when you realize your tranquility is a treasure too valuable to trade. In your youth, you might have sat through a friend's endless complaints or nodded along as family bickered over decades-old grudges, thinking it was just part of the deal. But now you see those moments for what they are, thieves of your calm. Visiting someone doesn't just mean showing up. It means stepping into their world, their tensions, their noise. And if that world is laced with drama, passive-aggressive digs, recycled arguments, or a cloud of negativity that follows them like a shadow, you start to wonder, why am I here? What am I gaining from this? Picture a night you've lived through, a dinner table stretched tight with unspoken friction. Maybe it was a relative who couldn't resist a barb about your choices, or a friend who turned every story into a complaint. The food grew cold as the air thickened, and by the time you left, your shoulders were knotted, your spirit dimmed. You drove home, replaying it all, wishing you'd stayed in the sanctuary of your own space instead. That's the tipping point, when you realize time spent in stress is time you can't reclaim. And every minute matters more than it used to. Take Helen, a woman with a laugh that could warm a room, but a heart weary from years of peacekeeping. She used to visit her extended family religiously, every Sunday, like clockwork. The table would groan under plates of roast and potatoes, but the real weight was in the air. Sharp words between cousins, her aunt's veiled criticisms, the same tired squabbles that never found a grave. Each visit left Helen drained, her smile fading as she drove away. Then, one Sunday, she didn't go. She sat in her garden instead, the sun dappling her book, the quiet wrapping her in a kind of peace she'd forgotten she could claim. She waited for the guilt, but it never came. Instead, she felt free. From then on, Helen chose her visits carefully, only to those who welcomed her with open hearts, not clenched fists. And for the first time in years, she felt light again. Protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's wise. You don't owe your presence to anyone, especially not at the cost of your own happiness. The people who matter won't tether their love to your endurance of their chaos. So, when you sidestep the stress of a visit, you're not being cold, you're being kind to yourself. And that's a gift worth giving. Reason 3. Finding comfort in familiar spaces. Close your eyes for a moment and picture your home. Not just the walls and roof, but the way it feels. The soft creak of your favorite chair as you settle in. The scent of coffee curling from that chipped mug you refuse to replace. The way sunlight spills across the floor in a pattern you've memorized. As the years pile up, this space, your space, becomes more than a backdrop to your life. It's a sanctuary, a quiet rebellion against the clamor of the world beyond your door. And as you get older, you find yourself drawn to it more, the idea of leaving it less appealing than it once was. When you were younger, home was a launch pad, a place to crash between adventures. You'd barrel out the door, eager for the next visit, the next burst of laughter in someone else's living room. The road felt like it was calling, and staying in seemed like missing out. But time has a way of rewriting the script. Now, the thought of dressing up, navigating traffic, and sinking into a stiff couch somewhere else feels like a chore. Why trade the ease of your own rhythm for the unpredictability of another's? It's not that you've lost your love for people, it's that you've found a deeper love for the peace you've built. There's a joy in the familiar that grows sweeter with age. Waking up to the hum of your own routine, slipping into slippers worn soft by years, flipping through a book you've been meaning to finish, letting the day unfold on your terms. No small talk to navigate, no schedules to bend to, just the quiet freedom of being exactly where you belong. And when you do venture out, you notice the contrast more keenly. The host's house too loud with clanging dishes, the air thick with unfamiliar smells, the chair that pinches your back just so. Suddenly, you're counting the minutes until you can return to the embrace of your own four walls. Take Bill, a man whose broad shoulders once carried him through every social call with a grin. He'd pile into his truck, radio blaring, ready to trade stories over a beer or two. But as the gray streaked his beard, he started to feel it, the ache of being away. Every visit became a tally of discomforts, the chatter that drowned his thoughts, the furniture that didn't fit his frame, the nagging sense that he'd rather be elsewhere. One evening, after a particularly draining night, he made a choice. He stopped forcing himself out just because he felt he should. Instead, he turned his home into the gathering place, inviting friends to his porch where the chairs were just right and the pace was his own. For Bill, it was a revelation. Socializing didn't have to mean leaving comfort behind. It could mean bringing others into it. Choosing home isn't retreat, it's reclamation. You've spent years carving out this space, filling it with pieces of yourself. The quilt your grandmother stitched, the shelf of books that mark your journey. Why not savor it? When the world demands your presence, it's okay to say, "Not today," because home is where you're free to be unapologetically you, and that's a comfort worth cherishing. Reason 4. Preferring quality over quantity in social life. Rewind to your 20s, and life felt like a game of numbers. Friends were a tally. How many names you could list, how many parties you could squeeze into a weekend, how full you could keep your days. Every visit was a thread in a sprawling web, a way to prove you belonged. But as the decades turn, that game loses its shine. You start to see through the blur of faces and realize something profound. Real connection isn't about how many, it's about how deep. And so you stop chasing the crowd and start tending the roots of the relationships that truly matter. Age brings a kind of clarity, a lens that sharpens what's essential. When you were younger, you might have dashed across town for a casual coffee, lingered at a barbecue just to say you were there. It was about momentum, about keeping the wheels spinning. But now, you feel the weight of each step, and you want it to count. Shallow friendships, those built on habit or convenience, start to feel like clutter. You're not here to impress or appease anymore. You want the people who get you, the ones where silence is as comfortable as laughter, where presence is a gift, not a performance. Think of the acquaintances who've drifted through your life, co-workers you grabbed drinks with, neighbors you waved to over the fence. How many of those ties left a mark? How many faded the moment the routine shifted? Then think of the handful who stayed, the friend who remembers your quirks, the sibling who knows your story by heart. Those are the ones you hold close now, the ones you'd rather see once in a blue moon and feel alive than visit weekly out of duty. It's not about cutting people off, it's about curating a circle that lifts you up. Nancy knows this shift well. She used to be a whirlwind of plans, phone buzzing with invites, weekends packed with visits, all to keep from being forgotten. Her address book was a mosaic of names, but her heart felt scattered. Then, as the years softened her edges, she saw the truth. The friends who mattered didn't need her to prove anything. She let go of the guilt, stopped filling her days with noise, and leaned into the quiet beauty of the few. There's her best friend from college, who she sees twice a year, but talks to like no time has passed. Her neighbor down the street, whose porch chats feel like therapy. Nancy's world got smaller, but it grew richer. Less obligation, more soul. This choice isn't isolation, it's intention. You're not shutting doors, you're opening windows to the relationships that breathe life into you. True friends don't tally your visits, they treasure your trust. And when you focus on quality over quantity, you find a social life that feels less like a race and more like a homecoming. Reason 5, a shift in priorities and personal reflection. Step back and look at your life like a canvas, once splashed with bold, chaotic strokes of motion, always chasing the next event, the next hello. Being seen, being part of it all, felt like the point. But as the colors of age settle in, the picture changes. You start to paint with softer hues, deliberate lines. The things that once drove you, staying in the loop, filling every silence with company, fade into the background. What rises instead is a hunger for meaning, for peace, for moments that align with the person you've become. This shift is a gift of time. When you were younger, saying yes was reflex. Every invite, a chance to belong. Every visit, a stitch in the social fabric. But now, you've earned the right to pause, to ask, does this matter to me? You see your days as finite, each one a thread to weave into something true. Maybe it's not about rushing out to see someone. It's about sinking into a book that stirs your mind, tending a garden that blooms under your care, or sitting still long enough to hear your own thoughts. Visiting for the sake of it feels hollow when you could be feeding your soul instead. Robert lived this transformation. He'd spent decades as the man everyone counted on. Dinners, barbecues, late-night chats, always there with a handshake and a story. His life was a blur of faces, a trophy case of presence. But as his knees stiffened and his hair thinned, he felt a pull inward. One autumn day, he skipped the usual round of visits and took a walk instead, leaves crunching underfoot, the air sharp and alive. He came home, cracked open a novel he'd shelved for years, and lost himself in its pages. That night, he didn't miss the clamor. He felt full. Robert stopped chasing the old rhythm and started building a new one. Quiet mornings with coffee, trails through the woods, reflections on a life well lived. Alone didn't mean lonely, it meant free. This isn't about pushing people away, it's about pulling yourself closer. You're not abandoning connection, you're redefining it on your terms. Aging lets you trade the noise of expectation for the stillness of choice, and there's power in that. When you prioritize what fills you, whether it's solitude, a hobby, or the rare visit that sparks joy, you're not just living, you're thriving. Reason 6, recognizing that true friendships don't require frequent visits. Here's a truth that dawns slowly, like sunlight creeping over a hill. The best friendships don't crumble under distance or silence. When you were young, keeping them alive felt like a mission. Weekly calls, regular drop-ins, a constant pulse of contact to prove you cared. Absence seemed like a threat, a crack that could widen into a chasm. But with age comes wisdom, and you see it now. Real bonds don't need a leash. They stretch across time, resilient and steady, rooted in something stronger than a calendar. Life pulls everyone in its own direction. Families grow, jobs shift, homes change. Yet the friends who matter don't measure your love by miles or months. They're the ones you can call after a year and fall into step with, as if the gap was just a breath between sentences. It's the friend who sends a text out of the blue, the one who laughs at a memory from decades past like it was yesterday. You don't visit often, but when you do, it's electric. Time folding in on itself, the connection as alive as ever. And the ones who faded, they were never built to last. Eleanor carried this lesson in her bones. She'd spent years fretting over her absence, apologizing for missed coffees, worrying her friends would drift without her touch. Her guilt was a shadow, whispering she wasn't enough. Then one day, she stopped. She let the weeks stretch, testing the waters. What she found was grace. Her truest friends didn't flinch. There was Sarah, who'd moved across the country, but still mailed her postcards with scribbled updates. Tom, who greeted her after months with a bear hug and a "Where were we?" Eleanor learned that love doesn't demand a knock on the door. It thrives on trust, on showing up when it counts, not just when it's convenient. This is why the pressure to visit fades. True friendships don't tally your footsteps. They bank on your heart. If someone guilts you for the space between, maybe they're not the anchor you thought. The ones who stay don't need you to prove a thing. They know you're there, and that's enough. Final thoughts. As we draw this journey to a close, take a breath and let these 6 reasons settle into you like stones in a riverbed. Visiting less isn't a failing, it's a freedom. Life shifts, and so do you, weaving a tapestry of choices that reflect who you are now, not who you once were. Whether it's guarding your energy for the moments that spark, sidestepping the weight of drama, nesting in the comfort of home, cherishing depth over breadth, honoring your own priorities, or trusting the strength of real bonds, you're not retreating, you're refining. Aging hands you a rare gift, the power to live on your terms. No more bowing to the shoulds, showing up just to be seen, visiting just to check a box. You choose what lights you up, what steadies your soul. And when you do step out, it's not out of duty, it's out of desire, a deliberate yes to the people who make your world brighter. Your worth isn't in how often you knock on doors, but in how you nurture what matters. In your way, in your time. The ones who love you get it. They don't count your absences. They celebrate your presence, however it comes. As you let go of the rest, you're left with a life stitched with intention, rich with the connections that endure. So stand in that truth. You're not losing anything. You're gaining everything that counts.